Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lyra podcast. I'm Ryan, also known as Comic Stan, and I love comic books. My co-host loves regular books, but I make him read comic books and then we talk about them in depth. And with me as always is my aforementioned Transylvanian co-host, it's Jamie.
Apparently sometimes you even make me read comic books that are based on books that I've already read.
Well, here's where you're wrong, sirree, and I've caught you in a trap, a web, as such. It's actually based on the 1931 movie, which is itself based on the book, so it's kind of by proxy.
So is this the Bela Lugosi one?
The one that was 1931, whenever that was. By the way, we're doing Dracula. This is the fastest we've ever gotten to the comic. I'm not used to this speed.
This is super quick.
And we're going full spoilers for this. 4 issues is all they're covering. We're going full spoilers because it is essentially the film from the 1931 film. So here we go.
It's a 1931 film and a book that's 130 years old. So
I've had comments about spoilers on YouTube that you'd be surprised.
So, because do you know who Bela Lugosi is?
Is he the actor that played?
Yeah, obviously.
You say obviously, but
in fairness,
I saw in reference they talking about, everyone referred to the director when they were talking about the film, Todd Browning, I think his name is.
I think that's so this is based on the Bela Lugosi film.
Yes.
So Bela Lugosi is also the guy who was in some of the Ed Wood films that we talked about the other day.
That era of time, wasn't it?
Yeah,
pre-Code Hollywood, I saw it referred to.
Yes. Well, so the Dracula film was a bit earlier than that, because he was a little bit older by the time Ed Wood knew him. He was also hopelessly addicted to heroin at this point, and which is why he ended up working with people like Ed Wood, because no one else would hire him, and so he just wanted money for skag. Like, he would insist on being paid on his way out of shooting with Ed Wood, so he could go and score. So I was thinking about it because I reread some of Dracula leading up to this and just refamiliarized myself with the book. I'd not read that book since I was about 16 years old.
Interesting, because it's probably one of the books you bring up the most because of the style of storytelling, which the word for that is
epistolary.
Yeah, I knew obviously, but for the listeners,
it comes up a lot because we talk about epistolary a lot, and it's a really good example of an epistolary.
Exactly.
And I realized rereading chunks of it today how epistolary it is.
Yeah,
very much so.
And I read this just assuming that it was based off the Bram Stoker original, and then it clicked as I was reading. I was like, oh wait, it's Universal. This is the Universal monsters. So literally Universal Studios have got Skybound and Image to make these comics on their behalf.
Yeah.
And it's actually really interesting because there's a forward, not even a forward, there's an end part in the first issue. So this is Universal Monsters Dracula by Skybound Entertainment Image Comics, written by James Tynion IV. I can't remember which is correct. Art by Martin Simmonds and lettering Rus Wooton. And that's all important because the bit I read was written by Tynion IV, end of the first issue. And he talks just a bit about his history with Dracula, like what he says, like, I can't remember when I first learned about the character of Dracula, which I think is the same for most people. He's like just one of those characters that's been around all the time. But he also made a point of saying, oh, this is for the first time in a long time that he'd worked on a comic that wasn't owned by him. Like, because Image famously creator-owned comics.
Yeah.
So he said this is the first one in a while where that's not the case, but it was a chance to work on one of the most, famous fictional characters of all time, the rights of which, if you're doing Dracula specifically, are held by Universal. You can do obviously generic vampires and it doesn't matter, but if you're doing Dracula, like especially Transylvanian Dracula, then it's Universal. And speaking of Universal, at the end, I've got a fun little bit. We're going to talk about Universal's attempt to get a cinematic universe off the ground with their Universal monsters. So
the Universal Cinematic Universe?
Yeah, it was called Dark Universe.
And was it just all the monsters?
Yeah, in a sense, yeah.
So did they do that shitty Frankenstein film as well?
I'll tell you at the end. Getting that podcast episode of attention, Stick around for the juicy details of a crash and burn cinematic universe.
That's very comic literate, though.
That's extremely comic literate.
It's becoming quite on brand for us to talk about shit like that. And I'm cool with that.
I like it. I like joining in anything. Because all these comics, the thing about the comics medium is it's so interlinked with every franchise. Because like we've said before, every franchise has a little cash grab and makes a comic. And sometimes the comics are just whatever. And sometimes they're just unreasonably high quality for no reason. Like, they've got no right to be as good as they are. I always think of the Transformers comic we read, which might be my best comic of the year without being kind of thinking about it.
Really?
It's a strong contender, but we'll get to that.
I don't know what we read this year.
Well, that's why I do up the list and send you the list.
Yeah, this is why you send me a list at the end of the year, isn't it?
And to be fair, I wouldn't know unless I went back and made a list as well.
We're getting to... It's that time soon.
Getting that time. It's going to be the first Comic Literate Best of the Year. So if we separate it, the awards are cheers and jeers, and the best of will be the actual best bits of this podcast, which I halfway through the year started to collate all the bits as I'm editing.
Have you actually been finding
I've been noting them down, because I'm sure shit wasn't going to go back through the episodes and get them that way. Like, bollocks to that. But yeah, so little treat for the end of the year.
I mean, I have a lot of friends who listen now.
I mean, you do have too many friends, so...
Well, no, I have many acquaintances. I keep my circle small.
I've walked down the street with you and had people stop and talk to you at a rate where it slowed down us getting to the place we were trying to get to.
That's really normal, though.
For you, yeah.
Well, no, we live in a small city.
Small city, but it's still a city. It's
everyone knows everyone.
It's not like the village from Hot Fuzz.
Here you eat, Jamie.
Exactly. Well, it did sound like that, but that's besides the point. So, get into the comic, and I think this is an interesting one because, like last week, we did Uzumaki by Junji Ito. I made the point of being like, we kind of have to do story and art together because the art is the main thing, and the story is kind of, the vehicle for the art. In this instance, we are getting a pretty somewhat faithful adaptation of that 1931 film, which is in itself a quite by the blocks Dracula story, if that makes sense.
No, it's not.
No, as in the film in modern media. Count from Transylvania, Mysterious New Count, and stuff.
Right, yeah. So, it has all of the right elements. It just puts them together in entirely the wrong order.
Yeah. And I've got a lot of notes on the story, but I think the art is going to be a bit what I do maybe more of the talking about. I don't know do you feel the same? Or
I definitely want to talk about Dracula in general. In my research today, I had some interesting thoughts about Dracula in general. And also kind of where it fits in culturally, because I think a lot of people assume that Bram Stoker's not an English dude.
Irish?
He's very much English.
Okay, right.
He lived in England.
Fair.
And so, it sort of fits into a pretty rich tradition of Gothic literature in English literature. And the Gothic was a fairly well-established idea by the end of the 19th century when he wrote this?
Yeah, 1897.
Yeah, so this is sort of... That era of time was called the fin de siècle. And that's what you kind of call that era of art. Very, very late 19th century, very, very early 20th century. Sort of 1890s to sort of, maybe 1905 kind of Regency era. And the Gothic was super popular at the time. So much so that Jane Austen wrote a parody of a Gothic novel.
Off the top of your head, do you know how this relates to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein? Because I always think that's the credited as the beginning of Gothic literature.
Well, no, because the Gothic was a trope that existed in architecture and culture from the 1790s.
Right, but sorry, Gothic in specific to literature as opposed to the aesthetic.
Yeah, and so Frankenstein was, but Frankenstein is almost sort of early science fiction as well.
I'd say it's a bit of both because it's quite dark topics, but I see the science fiction obviously is quite evident in there as well.
Yeah, no, I mean it's widely accredited as being one of the first true pieces of science fiction. I don't necessarily think of Frankenstein as being as typical of Gothic literature as Dracula is.
Oh, yeah.
Dracula's
more Gothic, yeah.
Dracula epitomizes Gothic literature.
People still dress like him today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just being Gothic. Just being goth.
Yeah, I mean, they missed the big loopy mustache.
Did he have a mustache in the book?
Well, this is why I've referenced it. Yeah.
Right. But not in the film. So that's the differences that people have, I suppose, in the characters.
And that Dracula film, whatever his name was, the Bela Lugosi one. That's not the first.
Todd Browning.
That's not the first Dracula film. There's Nosferatu.
Yeah, it's the first sound Dracula film.
Have you watched Nosferatu?
No, I've seen like a lot of the clips of like the original character. Tell you where I first saw him, this is a dumb story, dumb anecdote. First time I saw him, I think a lot of people my age or our generation did, is in a SpongeBob SquarePants joke. And it's the
yes.
The plot is like they think the Krabby Patty's haunted, and then it turns out there's like a guy with a spatula for hand trying to get in, and then then it turns out it's just a guy who wants a Krabby Patty, and they're like, but if it was you calling and it was you on the window, but who was turning the lights on and off? And then they look and it's Nosferatu with the light switch. They're like, Nosferatu. And I'm a kid, I'm like, who is this creepy guy in SpongeBob? Like,
so I've seen that silent Nosferatu film, and I can only assume that I watched it in some kind of educational setting.
Yeah, you weren't going there for entertainment.
Yeah, this is it. No.
Come on, boys, let's watch Nosferatu.
This is it.
Get the popcorn.
Like, no millennial is watching that for pleasure, so I can only assume I watched it.
Well, I say, except for those ones that you would have been on that course with, who were like, yeah, actually, we should watch Nosferatu. It's the original vampire film, actually. Like,
maybe, actually.
Those kind of people. You know those people.
I am those people. So should we start with the arting? Because I can talk about the wider context and stuff that I find quite interesting.
Yeah,
throughout.
I've got a lot more to say about the story towards the end of it, which we'll see how that comes up. But yeah, in terms of the art, generally my overall thing was I really enjoyed it. I think it really suited the content of the story while also giving it its own kind of identity. Like, yeah,
it's pretty.
All the art, as best to describe as I can, was it's every pound's an oil painting, and some of it is a bit more like kind of very standard, like here's the characters, here's the setting kind of thing, and then at other points it shows like the horror slowly creeping in and the depth of insanity that some of the characters are in, and Dracula's control over characters and that kind of stuff. But I really appreciate overall the strong use of red color and everything. Very
something
good.
That was interesting to me is that it really disrooted it from the time period it was written in. So I couldn't tell whether this was set in the Victorian era or somewhere in the early 20th century, purely because there's some panels where everyone's dressed quite Victorian, particularly with reference to like Mina and Lucy.
Yeah.
They're both in sort of quite Victorian looking dresses. But then you see people in modern suits with trilby hats, which is distinctly 20th century. And so I was kind of reading it and I was like, I can't tell when they've set it. And that is the kind of thing that would probably only bother me, but it's something that bothered me.
I think with this, it's intentionally not trying to be like very realistic. No,
of course, but like there's certain cues, and you know, I think when you're adapting source material like that, if you disroot it from its original setting, it's nice to have some sense of when it is set.
Yeah,
and the visual language would have done all the work there. And so if everyone looked very distinctly 20th century, that's one thing. But there was sort of moments where it felt like the 19th century and moments where it sort of felt like the 20th century. And I couldn't really tell when it was supposed to be set.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things that like for me, not having the relevant experience to know the difference, obviously I didn't notice. But I think we've had a point where like, I know we've done like science fiction stuff or especially superhero stuff where I'm like, well, hang on, they've done this all weird, and you don't even go so far as to say like that's wrong and that's bad. Be like, oh, there's a weird juxtaposition here that I noticed and it's affecting me. So
I'm not saying it was bad, and to say it bothered me is an overstatement. I noticed it. I noticed it, and I've brought it up now because I noticed it. And it was
I had to make a point.
Well, it was just interesting to me that I was kind of reading it, going, right, well, is this supposed to be set at some point in the late Victorian era?
Do you think,
or is this supposed to be set in the 1930s, 1940s, for the time people are wearing trilby hats consistently?
Do you know what I reckon? And
what's that?
You know, probably we should have watched the 1931 film, or at least bit of it in preparation for this. We didn't, because as we've established many times, we're not professional.
Do you reckon they were costuming people in the 1931 film in what was fashionable at the time?
I reckon the men were in the fashionable at the time suits and stuff. I think, and I wouldn't be surprised if the women were like, well, it's like gothic, like, you know, him coming through the window when she's in bed. Like, I think they just kind of scattershot like, oh, this for these people and this for this, probably without even thinking. Like, I think the men, they probably were just like, get him in a suit because that's what movie stars are wearing right now. But then for the women, it was like, oh no, we want this kind of look for her and this kind of look for her.
That's an interesting point that I imagine is probably the case. And that's why it looks this way in the comic book.
And that's why people come to this podcast, because we work those things out and we're both highly intelligent.
Do you not think that's quite interesting, though?
No, I do. I do. I think that is an interesting point of like those kind of films really set the look for iconic characters like Dracula for a long time. And it's interesting to think like, why did they do it like this way? And you go, oh, it's because of this, like this kind of benign reason. Yeah,
so much of the way that things, as technology advances, modern technologies retain the look of old technologies. But the way that old technologies looked, or the way that things used to look, is more due to limitation.
Yeah.
It's like the save icon still being a floppy disk, even though most people don't know what a floppy disk is now.
Yeah, when the joke about a Gen Z who found a floppy disk and they're like, someone 3D printed the save icon.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's fun.
I saw one where a kid had one and their dad was like, oh, you store files on it, and the kid was trying to work out where to put the headphones.
I remember finding an old PlayStation 1 memory card, and when I saw that its storage was something like 128 megabytes, I couldn't believe it, and I'd used it, but like now, being more used to computer size, memory storage sizes now, like I just bought a 2 terabyte one, and I'm like already filled half of it. Like, that's
remember how exciting it was when you got a 256 megabyte PlayStation memory card and it had 2 pages on it?
I don't remember that specifically, but I remember, but maybe because my experience of it was like, this one's full, I need a new one, this is the latest one, get that, boom. Yeah. Like, I don't think I had like I was just like, just get in and play the games. Like, I was just addicted to video games as a child.
Oh man, I mean, the PlayStation 1 was such a fantastic console.
Yep. I want the PS5 now, and it's still going strong. So,
I don't.
Yeah, that's
I don't anymore.
You're a Wii man.
I have a Switch.
A Switch man. That's it.
I've always had, not always, but for most of my life, I've had some variation of Game Boy.
Classic.
Because I liked the Game Boy as a kid. And so I've owned a couple DSs through the years and a Switch, and that's kind of all I have. But I don't really game that hard, man.
Yeah, that's
do you know what I mean? Like, I just don't game very hard.
You're a casual gamer, and that's not a derogatory term, as some like elite gamers, I'm doing air quotes for elite, would have you believe.
Do you know what, mate? I don't mind if the elite gamers don't like me.
So back to the comic. One of the things, like the first kind of thing I'm looking for when I'm opening this is how creepy are the characters that are meant to be creepy look, right? And straight off the bat, Renfield is pretty creepy looking. Yeah,
so Renfield's an interesting character here. Very creepy looking. Yes, indeed.
He's got like a proper white face. I don't mean just white like Caucasian. I mean like paint white, like
he's
Michael
pasty.
Jackson white, but has even whiter than that.
He has a ghostly pallor,
which is always glowing. It appears, which is weird. And then at one point, he's talking, and it's already creepy because he's got this really white face and like black hair and like black features. And then at one point, one of the panels, he has almost confused it for like photo, but it's not. But photorealistic eyes and teeth. And when it's just those, that was especially creepy.
Yeah, no, totally. And then they do similar things with Mina when she gets turned.
Yes, yeah.
And Mina gets very creepy.
Yeah.
And so these are the points where the film, and by consequence the comic book, divert from the book quite heavily.
I looked up because I initially looked at the book and then went, wait, this story's different. And then I went, oh yeah, the film. So then went on the film and then realized that's the story they're doing.
Yeah.
So this comic is kind of coming in maybe a third into the way of the film. So in the film, Renfield goes to Transylvania. In the 1931 film.
Right, sorry, yeah.
So that's why I noticed the difference, because when I went to the book first, I went, oh, John Harker goes to Transylvania. So then that's when I was like, oh, wait, this is not the book, this is the film. So yeah, in the film, Renfield goes to Transylvania, and then he's on the boat, the Demeter, coming back. This one opens up. He's just been caught on the boat with all the dead bodies, and they're like,
brought to.
How did he do this? And he's in the asylum.
And then also, I believe in this, the Doctor John Seward is Mina's father.
Yeah,
he's not in the book.
Okay,
obviously. I say obviously. Mina has a different surname in the book.
Is not Mina Harker?
Well, she's not. So this is the thing. She's not married to John until he comes back from Transylvania in the book.
Right.
So yeah, the salient point here is that John goes to Transylvania and Renfield isn't a POV character.
Right.
So we don't see any chapters from his perspective. He's not a particularly important character. But his storyline kind of gets rolled in with Lucy's.
Yeah.
So there's a whole passage of the book where Lucy and Mina are in it's the seaside town in Britain, Grimsby? Not Grimsby.
Wisbeach?
Wisbeach.
Yeah. I saw that in the Wikipedia.
Yeah, so they're in this seaside town. No, I can't remember which one it is now. I don't think it is Wisbeach.
Y Beach or something like that?
Whitby. They're in Whitby. Yeah. And then Lucy sort of gets turned, and there's a whole back and forth where Van Helsing, not John Seward, starts giving her blood transfusions. It's really important that it's Van Helsing that does that for reasons that I'll talk about later. And finally, they end up cutting her head off because they find her having bitten a bunch of children.
See, I thought just back then that was just a medical practice of like, we've tried everything else, so
we might as well cut her head off.
The leeches didn't work.
No, so she dies. So she's like really suffering and really degenerating. And then she dies and suddenly she's very beautiful again. And that's kind of her becoming something altogether monstrous. And then a bunch of children start appearing with similar bite marks to hers. And it turns out she's been biting the kids. And so they chop her head off, fill her mouth full of garlic, stuff a crucifix in her and bury her. And that's how Lucy ends up being laid to rest. And that's kind of what we get for Renfield at the end, isn't it? Which is that, you know, they find a way of killing him in such a way that they basically save his soul, which is what they do for Lucy. You know, it's interesting that the differences between the film and the comic book and then the original book, which is that they've kind of rolled together Renfield and Lucy in a certain way. Even though Lucy still very much exists in the comic book, she just dies quite early on, doesn't she?
Yeah, and probably was that in the film, I would imagine. I think this is, but when I looked at the Wikipedia, it seemed like this is basically the film's plot.
So Lucy's a really, really important character in the book. She's a more central character than Mina. So we see a lot of stuff through Mina's eyes, and Mina is a really important point of view character in the book. But really, everything happens to Lucy.
I'm guessing that's because they're doing it as an epistolary, they needed someone to go through a bunch of stuff for another character to witness.
Yeah.
And Mina, because obviously then later I'm assuming later in the story, like with the film, she is then the one who is at risk of meeting the same fate.
Yeah.
So they needed someone close to her to go through it all and be killed by it. And then the threat is, what if happens to this character who we actually know because we've actually been hearing directly from them?
Yeah.
So whereas the film, and this is interesting, this is one of the earliest like adaptations, like film adaptations, especially with sound. Like, so that's obviously quite different as well. But this is one of the first ones. And you can imagine like producers in like 30s Hollywood being like, yeah, that story's great and all, but we're going to make it better by completely rewriting it. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Which is still something that Hollywood's dealing with even today.
If I'm being honest, I think this is quite a nimble rewrite and actually circumvents a lot of what gives the book its charm, but also what kind of makes the book a bit unreadable these days.
Yeah.
Which is that it is a slow, quite onerous read. And there's a lot that doesn't necessarily need to be there. I think John Harker is annoying in the book for me. He's very naive and a bit simple.
Yeah.
I remember...
And he's not that far off here.
No, so the first time he kind of starts to realise that Dracula is a vampire, he's shaving and he notices that Dracula is behind him, but he can't see them in his mirror. And he accidentally drops his mirror and he's just annoyed that he can't have a bloody good shave. And it's like, you just realise that
I look like a bloody labourman here.
Exactly, like... yeah. He's just realised that this fucking creepy count in this creepy castle that isn't on any of the maps that he's gone to visit doesn't have a reflection, and his sole worry is that he's going to have a bristly chin.
And back then, that was the worst fate that could befall a British man.
Absolutely.
An Englishman.
An Englishman nonetheless. Although beard wearing was at this point a sign of sort of masculinity and intelligence, which is really strange. So a young man
I say we both have beards now, so that's not the case anymore.
I've had a beard for a long time.
You've proven my point.
Yeah. I don't even think beard wearing was that trendy when I first started wearing a beard.
You were ahead of the curve. I'm guessing out of laziness?
No, I just always preferred it.
Ah, fair enough.
I just always sort of figured, why not?
True.
Like, it grows naturally anyway.
Not having shave is the top reason for having a beard, in my opinion.
Yeah.
All that putting the cream on and then all that, it's just annoying.
I'm going to be honest with you, mate. I don't really know.
Oh, wow. You went straight in then.
Well, yeah, because I shaved from the age of about 15 until I was like 19. So I maybe shaved for 3 or 4 years. And that's the point in your life where you shave like what, once a week?
Yeah, it's not just to stop the patchy coming through.
Yeah, from the age of like 19, I've had a full set and I'm in my early 30s now. So I only really shaved for a few years. And even then, I've never shaved every day. I've never done the thing that one would have to do to maintain a shaven face of shaving every morning.
Oh, God, never that point.
But like, I have maybe shaved clean 3 times in my adult life.
Well, we've made it to the shaving portion of the episode.
I know,
for
right?
those who are desperate to hear.
Well,
it's finally happened.
Yeah. But yeah, so
back to the comic.
John Harker here. Like, we get a kind of, I think, a streamlined version of John Harker. And I think we get a really neatened arc for John Seward and Van Helsing. I think it more clearly defines the boundaries between those two characters and gives us a nice sort of juxtaposition between a man of science and a sort of man of superstition.
He claims he's a man of science as well.
Well, so this is the thing he's doing, and this is the interesting thing that I said I was gonna get onto later. Kind of have done.
Now we're here.
In this, John Seward is experimenting with blood transfusion.
Yeah.
If it's implied that this is the late Victorian era, they haven't worked out blood types yet.
No.
Which is why so many of his blood transfusion patients keep fucking dying.
But just like there's 1 or 2 that work, there's like, well, there's something working here.
Exactly, yeah. And this is the thing. That era of medicine was very much just fuck about and find out.
Yeah, I watched a TV show about this exactly called The Nick with Clive Owen. But
Yeah.
it's literally set in that time. It's like, Doc's like, oh, he's a renowned doctor. It's like, what are you going to do? It's like, I'm just going to chop off some stuff and see what happens.
Well, this is the thing. We're still at a time when surgery is uncouth. And surgery is something for barbers to do.
Because they had access to all the cutting things, didn't they?
Yeah, totally. So a barber would open you up and be like, fuck it, we'll see.
Yeah.
Doctors were still, medicine was only just really going out of its like leeching humours era and into its soap and soup era. And so like, it's pretty historically accurate that people would look at John Seward with his blood transfusions and be like, you're a fucking animal. That shit's weird.
Yeah. It doesn't work most of the time,
no,
so
and,
understandable.
Yeah, and kills just as many patients as it saves. But it's Van Helsing in the book that does all the blood transfusions.
Right. Because then it's weird here that at one point he's like, I'm also a man of science. And they're like, all right. And it's like, by the way, wear a crucifix just in case.
Yeah,
and
like, this is it, isn't it?
Well, which is it then?
And so John Seward runs a sanatorium in the books.
Yeah, and in this.
But it's Van Helsing who does all the fucky surgeries. And I think it feeds into a very, well-trodden vein in British culture, which is British Euroscepticism. And that is one of the themes of Dracula. And it's one of the things that led to Dracula. And I think it's one of the reasons it was so popular, is that by and large, it is a story about British Euroscepticism.
Well, I was going to go on a similar theme of that. But my interpretation was going to be, it's of a similar vein, it's Euroscepticism, but also of this rich foreigner who comes in and tricks the women into leaving with him, basically. And him having his way with them.
And this is absolutely it. And so do you know where Transylvania is?
No. Europe?
Well, yeah.
Pretty good.
Romania.
Okay.
Transylvania is kind of explained as a country here, but that's only because Europe hadn't had its sort of flux state in the early 20th century.
Is that where Vlad the Impaler Because that's who the character's based off, isn't it? The original Dracula.
And yes, Vlad the Impaler would have been active in that part of Eastern Europe.
There you go.
Again, that part of Eastern Europe didn't really have defined borders until like 1991.
So it was all just a mess of rich, powerful people doing probably whatever they wanted over there.
Well, yeah, so Transylvania is like widely regarded as the nicest part of Romania. Transylvania is meant to be stunning. It's meant to be really geographically and topographically interesting.
Castles over there.
Big fucking castles. Just really beautiful Gothic architecture, funnily enough. And so the original book was written at a time when Britain was seeing its first mass migration of Eastern Europeans into the UK. And if you're not English, you won't know about this. But among certain sections of British society, there is still a distinct burning hatred for Eastern European people that live in the UK.
It's one of the few still like socially accepted forms of like casual racism.
It is, isn't it?
Especially when you get onto the talk of travelers and gypsies. Like, don't know if those terms are still appropriate or not, but that's all I know it as.
Travelers, yes. Gypsies, almost certainly not.
Yeah.
So for our American listeners, the way that sort of racist British people talk about Eastern Europeans, particularly maybe people from Poland, is really similar to the way that you lot talk about Mexicans.
Yeah, and those are also the ones who are coming over and taking the jobs. I'm doing that in air quotes just to stress that enough. But then there's the added layer with the traveler community where they're not even taking the jobs. The racist stereotype is they're just coming over and committing crimes. Yeah, like that's absolutely a stage lower.
And there, there's a lot of Euroscepticism in British culture. In fact, do you know there's some historians who argue the source of British Euroscepticism is Henry VIII and the Reformation?
I do, but just for the listeners, do you want to elaborate on that a little more?
So, in what detail do you want me to explain the Reformation?
What's the quickest, simplest way?
Henry VIII had a wife who he no longer wanted to have sex with.
Okay, yeah.
But there was a young girl that he did want to have sex with. The Pope wouldn't give him a divorce. He tried really hard to get a divorce, so instead he said, fuck this, I'm starting my own church. Starting the English along a very, very long path over many monarchs and a couple hundred years towards having our own church, the
and
Church of England. And a lot of religious war.
Don't forget the deaths.
But the Reformation is seen as being the sort of root of British Euroscepticism, which is pretty firmly entrenched in English culture by the time this is written.
Yeah.
And then there's there's not even mass migration, but there's a notable migration of Eastern European people into the UK at the end of the 19th century. And it's one of the things this book's about. And I think it's interesting that largely is reinforced by this comic book. If anything, I think it's even more reinforced. Because in the book, John Harker goes over to Transylvania, do his business dealings with Dracula and kind of aggravates things, and then Dracula comes over. In the book, Dracula just sort of turns up in the comic book. Comic book.
What's left out here, it's implied in a lot of stuff and is bigger in the film, is that Renfield is the one who's gone over, done, I assume, similar stuff to John Harker, but he's then kind of become his minion, Dracula's minion, and now has come back as like the first, like even he was just on the ship, I think, and got picked up when Dracula was like asleep in the Transylvanian soil in the ship's cargo or whatever. But yeah, so it's kind of that similar thing.
So in the book, Dracula's like eating people on the ship, and the captain is the last dude left to pilot it home.
Yeah. And that's why Renfield's in the sanatorium, because they're like, we found you on a boat filled with bodies. You're the only one who could have done it.
Yeah.
But then also what they've got, and they're like, yeah, these guys were like ripped apart by a wild animal. Like,
and you are not that.
This guy's weedy and small. Like there's something going on here. So yeah, it's an interesting place to start off the story. And I think with regards to like the general storytelling, like I could tell that it was quite close to the film, even having not seen the film, because it just followed all these kind of like really standard storytelling devices, like really stereotypical, if that makes sense. Like introducing the character, like they delay that for quite a while, building up the suspense of it. I like the juxtaposition of like these high class society women talking about these violent murders.
Yeah.
Like these days, that's nothing. Like everyone's talking about true crime podcasts and TV shows or whatever.
Yeah.
But back then, it's like it looks like Pride and Prejudice, and they're like, the woman's like, tell me more about the violent murders. They're like, he was ripped apart by a beast with teeth and claws, and you're like, whoa, and that's an interesting thing to take away.
Which is definitely distinctly not very Victorian.
Well, that's what I mean.
And
it's
that really speaks to the sort of early 20th century sensibility a bit more than the Victorian sensibility, don't you think?
But that kind of stuff probably was happening at the time. Like, there's always been a fascination with violence and monsters and whatnot.
But it's the way they talk.
Yes, they're fascinated by it. But I think there's also an element of like, they feel very safe to talk about kind of stuff.
I mean, in fairness, the Dracula book has some pretty heavy sexual undertones.
Well, this is what I was saying earlier about the idea that, as I said, this wealthy foreigner is coming in and is completely removing the autonomy of the female characters. Like, that's the Dracula he hypnotizes people, but it seems like it's only happening to the women.
Daddy.
Well, Count Daddy.
Count Daddy.
But it's only happening to the women. Like, even Renfield, who has this psychic link with Count Dracula, it was still consented to, because he says, Dracula's like, I'll give you immortality. And Renfield's like, all right then. And then they have this psychic link.
Yeah.
But it's the women who fall under his spell. Like, even when they're just at this big public thing, and they're like, ooh, the Count from Transylvania is a interesting fellow, and I could listen to him talk for hours or whatever. So that, I think, really spoke to this idea of like, these people will come over and they'll trick your women into leaving you and falling under their spell.
Yeah.
And then, again, the metaphor of the blood draining and making them one of their own, it's like corrupting... like, I'm doing this all in air quotes, for anyone wondering, corrupting our pure virginal women and making them theirs. And that's,
absolutely.
That's those themes, I'm guessing, are all the way back to the original book.
And that has long been, the fear. And that's always a fear when British culture rubs up against another culture. Is, they're going to steal all our women because they look healthy and tanned, and we've never seen the sunlight and live off chips.
I especially loved the use of like the kind of collage art here, which again, like I said, the art's going to just keep coming up. But with the kind of collage art, there's like flashbacks and stuff like that. There's just like really part of the background with like the red effect.
I really like the art.
I think it's like similar to what I was going to say with the book and the film comparison as well. This feels like its own thing. The story feels very much just like the book. Feels very much just like the film. I'm going to do that a lot. But because of the art, the liberty they've taken with the art and like using the art to tell the story, I think this is like a really good comic adaptation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it validates itself. It validates its own existence by the art, because the art, it justifies it existing, because it makes it a notably different experience to watching the film, which is in turn a notably different experience to just reading Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah.
And I would absolutely recommend this to potentially a younger reader, or somebody who wanted to experience Bram Stoker's Dracula but didn't want to like
read a book, because books are for nerds.
Well, also just sort of trudge through 130-year-old texts.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really interesting about books is that they do age.
Yep.
In a way that cinema doesn't. But as a film becomes less enjoyable, I think, as it ages, because technology moves on and what audiences expect changes. But because you are physically reading a book, the English language has changed enough in 130 years that whilst English is technically still the same language, functionally it's a different language now. And actually reading Dracula is a bit of a chore.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the same as the fact that reading... I love classics. I love the classics. I love reading Jane Austen. I love reading,
Shakespeare?
I do. Well, yeah, kind of.
Close enough.
Yeah, but it's a chore. It's stodgy. It's written in a language that is still recognizably English, but just very different in the way it functions. And actually, this is a modernized version of the story that retains a lot of its character and a lot of its core meaning, but is just infinitely more palatable.
Yeah. I'll tell you what's very interesting here, which I found reading this. is, as you say, it's an updated adaptation of a very old story that's well known. But what I found here especially is it's not just a story that's well known. This is a character that is really in culture. Like, people know Dracula without knowing anything about the book or the old film or even any movie that's has a Dracula. People call vampires a Dracula. Like, that's how in it he is. And what I noticed especially is reading this.
I mean, there's fucking breakfast cereals in America named after this character.
Yeah. Count Chocula, the great.
Chocula,
and the Count from Sesame Street, the best ones. But what I noticed of reading here is it's such a divide between this original text and how big the character is now.
Yeah.
That it's not just as simple as, we know he's going to be the big bag, everyone knows, so we're going to delay his appearance because he's coming, and we'll show him in bits because we know people know the tension that's going to come up and whatever. But it gets to points where, for me, it kind of juxtaposes where you've got characters who say things like, this woman, Mina, is talking about Dracula, and she says, Castle Dracula in Transylvania, I bet it's beautiful. I bet it's something right out of a fairy tale. Now, for me as a modern person, seeing Dracula and Transylvania being compared to fairy tales is just wrong to me.
It's weird, isn't it?
It just reads to me like, is this a mistake? Like, obviously I know it's not, but it's that idea that people are just so like, ooh, a foreign dignitary, Count Dracula from Transylvania. It's so ingrained in me that I'm like, those are horror words.
Yeah.
Like, you might as well be saying like Captain Meathook from Murder Island.
Yeah.
Like, he seems like a nice guy. Like,
it's jarring, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think that's really interesting that you only get that now with like here's a new Dracula book, and you read it and get stuff like that.
I mean, something that's interesting is that a big part of the reason that Dracula and Frankenstein, to a lesser but still notable degree, are still so present in culture is because they are stories that went out of copyright at about the time that cinema was hitting its stride.
Yeah. Well, this is the whole thing. Universal they're using the films because that's what they still have copyright over.
And because of the Mickey Mouse laws, we will never get to play with the stories that we grew up with in the same way that, you know, people who were directing movies in the 1930s, who would be in like their 40s at the time and were reading a book that was published around the time they were born in 1890. Seems fucking mental, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But the timelines work out. It's the equivalent of like you and me getting to make a Star Wars thing, which we won't get to do because the copyright's been extended so much because of the Mickey Mouse laws.
Yeah.
If you want to know, if you don't know what that is, just give it a Google. But the Mickey Mouse laws are essentially extension of copyright to satisfy Disney in retaining their copyright on Mickey Mouse as it is.
Yes. Although Steamboat Willie is now in the public domain.
Yeah, I know, right? Which is fucking dope. I can't wait.
I can't wait for the horrible horror movie that someone's going to make soon, like the Winnie the Pooh one.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the absolute fucking treasure trove of horror porn that we're going to get. I don't even want to watch it. I just need to know that Disney knows it exists.
I just want to read the hate comments under the trailer. That's all.
Fuck yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, this character is, you're right, he's ever present in culture. And the vampire myth was a prevalent myth, particularly in Eastern Europe. Ideas of the vampire were very prevalent in Eastern Europe, but we have vampires in every culture. And, you know, I mean, there's vampire myths out in Asia, there's vampire myths in South America, aren't there? There's vampire myths in every culture, but the Eastern European tradition was the most prevalent, and even by the time this is written, you'd have Eastern European peasants who would think that one of their neighbours was an undead who was killing their cows. Like, that was a thing. That would be a thing, right?
That was the chupacabra in Mexico, wasn't it? Like, livestock being killed.
Similar thing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, wherever you go, when you have a community of people who don't have a lot to do, living this sort of agrarian lifestyle, they're going to create a monster that's the reason that their whatever goes missing, right?
Yeah. Because
it's way easier than interfacing with the cruel reality of life that is a wolf can just turn up and kill one of the sheep that you need to feed your family.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be that. And the vampire myth was just one of the more prevalent ones in Eastern Europe at the time. And we've gone from that kind of folkloric story to something that became a novel and then a film and is still really, really present in our culture.
Then it became Twilight.
And then it became Twilight. Well, yeah, I mean, but again, you know, I feel like Twilight to a certain degree, and like there's a lot of YA vampire fiction. It's not just Twilight. Twilight was part of a trend. It was
because vampires are sexy, and that's one consistent thing ever since the book.
And this is the thing, and this literally is the point I was driving at, is that
we're on the same wavelength.
Vampires are kind of sexy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know why.
With the one notable exception, which is the exception proves rule, Nosferatu.
Nosferatu, not sexy.
You got all sexy vampires, and you got ugly Nosferatu in the corner. It's just like, can I be with you guys? No, you get your own films.
Nosferatu who just has to masturbate on the rocking chair in the corner.
You could be in a SpongeBob episode. That's all you get.
You can scare the kids. But no, you're right, aren't they? Like, vampires are kind of sexy. I don't really get it personally, but there is so much sexy vampire fiction out there that people must be into it.
I think it's the idea of, like, across any sexual orientation, the idea that someone could be so sexually attractive that you fall under their spell. Like, it's that, like, imagine someone like that intrigue and... Yeah,
and I suppose there's two things that you don't often get in the same person sexually, which is youthful beauty and experience.
Yep.
And with a sexy vampire, they can look like... What's his name? The actor who plays Edward Cullen.
Robert Pattinson.
They can look like Robert Pattinson, but, like, have got a couple of 100 years of fuckboy antics under their belt, so they know what they're doing, right?
Yeah, they're young and youthful, but they're ready to settle down. That's what's appealing.
Somebody who looks like a young Robert Pattinson, but fucks like in his mid-40s.
Probably when you...
Oh yeah, shit. Scandal noted.
Do you want me to take that out?
Yeah. No, who's a top shagger in Hollywood now that isn't also a sex criminal? There can't be many left.
I bet Keanu Reeves fucks good.
Oh, yeah, but Keanu Reeves is like...
He might also be a vampire.
Well, this is... Have you seen the photo? Have you seen the...
I've seen the meme. It's a good laugh.
No, I reckon Keanu Reeves is a top shag. Like, I reckon he's like Dick Grayson levels of good in bed.
Oh, yeah, I'd imagine so. But also very tender and loving. Anyway,
well, back
to the comic.
No, this is important journalism.
We've established why vampires are sexy. That was important, and we've covered it now.
Yeah, and I suppose there is this sort of simmering sexuality in the comic book, but it's not a central observation of the comic, is it? And it's not a central... It's one of the features of the book, but it's not a central feature.
I think it explores it much like the book and presumably the film as well, that it's his spell that people are falling under. So it's the metaphor obviously is they are attracted to these exotic new man who's also wealthy and cultured and blah blah blah. But it's very much but he's a vampire and he has hypnosis powers, and that's what's happening here.
I mean, imagine if you were sort of uncultured and untravelled, and you lived in like Victorian London, so everyone was like, "Cool, blimey, governor, I've got so much tuberculosis I could barely click my heels."
Are you talking about London now?
Yeah. Yeah, this is what I'm talking. Yeah, London full of urchins.
Yeah.
But, you've only ever met, like, very English people, and then suddenly you meet, like, this very pale man who has, like, an Eastern European accent, and he's very wealthy and dressed all in black. And
he's wearing a cape.
Yeah, and you're like,
blimey,
fuck.
I've never seen one of those before.
Cool, blimey, governor. I want to schnozzle his nozzle. You would though, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would, but maybe I'm not the core audience for this.
Cool, blimey, governor, I want to schnozzle his nozzle.
Exactly.
That's not a sentence, is it?
I mean, it is now.
Yeah, well, yeah, now that I've done it.
Speaking of the sexiness, I think this is very much linked as well, is there's also undercurrents, and I assume this is the same in the book and the film as well, the undercurrents of the plain fact, always been the case with vampires, they are religious antagonists, Christianity antagonists, because they are scared of crosses and holy water and all that.
And garlic. Why garlic? I don't understand the garlic.
I don't know. I think that was just a thing of like, cool, this is really strong, so I bet vampires would hate this.
Yeah.
But there's probably some bollocks where he's like, oh, it's because of the blah, blah, blah in the 20th century, whatever. But the reason I bring up the religious stuff is because, like, that's made evident here with not only Van Helsing being like, get your crosses and blah, 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 but also there's a very distinct scene where Lucy's funeral, Dracula is hanging out at the edge of the cemetery at the gate. And everyone's like, well, I wonder why he's not entering the holy grounds of the cemetery. Yeah. Like, that's a weird thing.
I mean, very similar to that scene in Hellboy.
Yep. Well, the opposite, because Hellboy's like, yeah, I can own a church. Oh, no, yeah. The actual devil can, yeah. So, but it's all under that umbrella of like evil stuff can't go on Christian ground because Christianity is good. Like, that's the message. But it's encompassed even better by Van Helsing himself, because he says a bunch of funny stuff, which I've also made of as well. But there's one serious part where he says he's explaining to, what's it, Seaward, yeah. He says there is rot to London. This creature we hunt has taken advantage of. So I interpret that. I think that's a pretty clear interpretation of like impure sin is rampant in London, and that's brought this demon there because he represents, and they literally say it later as well, he represents what we're tempted to be, like a wild beast reverting away from the godly part of humankind. You know, it's all that kind of stuff.
So something that's really interesting, and again, it's worth noting here, is that you are right, and I agree it has that function in the comic book. That is in direct opposition to the book.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Because all of the Christian iconography in the book is all Catholic.
Okay. I mean, it's under Christian, like under the Christian umbrella.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's Catholic. And so when John Seaward is in Transylvania, the lady in the inn hands him... John Harker, sorry.
Come on, mate, it's the book. We all know the book.
Right? Hands him a crucifix and he goes, oh, and he's a bit uncomfortable with it because that's Catholic stuff.
Yeah.
That's what those weird Europeans do. We're good C of E guys. And he literally says, oh, it really kind of struck me as iconoclasm. Right. Basically just the process by which they worshipped false icons in the Roman Church, and we didn't do that in Protestantism. And so all of that heavy Christian iconography in the book is all kind of rolled under that weird Euroscepticism that they're trying to get across.
Yeah.
So the crucifixes and all that stuff to a Victorian audience is, oh my God, it's all Catholic stuff, and we're good Church of England people here. And so that actually is as alien to them as the horror stuff is. It's like, the way that you get rid of the fucking weird vampire is to have a weird crucifix like they do in Italy. We don't do that in England anymore.
Yeah, and I would bet that's definitely what was changed in the film, because the film was obviously going out to American Western audience. It was like, Christianity's good and it'll save you from the vampires. Like, that's what they wanted to do in the film.
We're also, by the 20th century, we're hitting a time where there's a lot more religious freedom.
I mean, America was still pretty, like, they have the whole state and church thing, but like, they were pretty puritanical even back then.
Oh, no, I mean in the UK.
Right.
There was more religious freedom to be Catholic. You've got to remember, in England, we went through periods where each successive monarch for a little while flip-flopped on whether or not we were a Protestant or a Catholic country. And so you'd be Catholic one day and then fucking Mary would die and it'd be like, oh, we're all, you know.
Have you heard? We're all Protestant. I was like, oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, totally. And so in the Victorian
Just tell
era,
me what religion to be.
Yeah, and so... There wasn't necessarily this relaxed attitude to it until really after the war, when it was like, fuck it, you're all Christians, it doesn't matter what type anymore.
I'm surprised it was that late, like not knowing myself. But then you always think of these things
Catholicism,
of like, oh, that's really old, like religious war in the UK, but yeah.
And this is it, isn't it? And so actually, I think, again, it's more of the sort of very English stuff. Like the very Victorian English stuff that it made perfect sense for them to cut out of the film and subsequently the comic book. Whereas, like, I don't need to see John Harker's aversion to a crucifix. Because, to be honest with you, this is going out to a wider audience who don't necessarily understand the complex history of Catholicism in the UK.
Yeah.
And if you do, and you read it, and he gets given the crucifix and he goes, oh, that strikes me as iconoclasm. And you go, he's C of E, that's weird to him, that's funny, right? Whereas if you don't, like leaving that in the comic book, I think would have made it a bit too stodgy.
I think, again, I would place money on when the film was coming out, they were like, we need to make Christianity like the good team here. Like just all encompassing good. Like Christian purity, good drives away evil. And not even in a way of they're like trying to win people over or convert people or any of that bollocks. I think just in a way of like, how do you defeat the evil with a cross? Like, because God is good and they're demons. Like they just simplified it that way, I think.
Yeah. And again, it is very much intended, in the book, it does still have that function of like, here they're using Christian rite to ward off evil spirits.
Yeah.
And they use like communion wafers and stuff. Again, communion is very Catholic, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
You don't
don't do it in Protestant, do they?
You don't do it in Lutheran traditions, no.
Yeah.
And so but it's just interesting that it had that changing function. And again, imagine being in a Hollywood exec room and having the one English bloke who's pitching Dracula, and they're like, what's all this stuff about them not liking crucifixes? And you're like, well,
it's
actually the Reformation and Henry VIII and Protestantism, they'd go, Christianity's good though, we'll leave it in. And do you know what I mean?
Exactly,
and you're absolutely right, aren't you?
In terms of what they left and took out, I noticed it definitely in the kind of last quarter, so maybe like end of the third, bit of the fourth issue.
It wraps up to its conclusion a lot more promptly.
Well, I would say even a little more before that, what was kind of very striking in terms of what wasn't there was a part where Van Helsing and Seward are talking, and Van Helsing is like, I don't know if I got it exactly, but it's basically like, oh yeah, don't you remember when he was in here earlier and we got that mirror out and then he ran off and turned into a wolf and ran across the yard? And it's like, we didn't see that. Like, he's asking him, and I, as the reader, I'm like, I didn't see that. Like, when did that happen? And I get what they're trying to do. Like, obviously, they're trying to fit it all into the 4 issues, so they kind of skip that part. But also, I think that's probably one of the more important parts to keep in. To show.
Don't necessarily know that it happens in the book either. I think it's unique to the film.
Yeah, I think it was unique to the film because I looked up in the film and saw that. I suspected that as much.
Yeah.
And what was interesting with that as well is when you think about it, that's an important part to show like the development of the characters learning about the truth about this Count Dracula and his connection to everything. But what is interesting, I think the reason they took it out, it's not just to save time. They do a very deliberate thing in this comic of not ever, apart from right at the end, not ever having Count Dracula speak.
I know, right?
And I think that was very intentional to have him, keep him like removed from any semblance of like being a person. Like he is just a monster, like beyond a monster, a force of evil. Like natural force of evil.
And this is like, I've been thinking about this since we did the Spirals episode. Was that last week?
Last week, yeah.
And I was thinking about it with reference to Silent Hill 2 specifically.
Right.
Probably my favourite horror game that I've ever played. I've not played that many.
It's definitely one of the top ones.
But the thing that's so scary about Silent Hill is that you don't see the thing that's killing everyone, right? It's like nebulous, and that makes it more scary.
Isn't it Pyramid Head? Doesn't he turn up in it?
Yeah, but you never really see it, do you? Or at least not until quite late in the game, as I remember. It's just sort of this like force.
I think like
grey cloud appears and things die.
I think there's things within the town like Pyramid Head, but the reason the town is as it is just never properly explained.
Yeah, you don't see the scary thing. And it's the same with the Spirals thing. You don't really, do you know what I mean? We never really find out. It's just...
And it's like the Lovecraftian element.
Yeah.
And I assume...
Lovecraft borrowed from Bram Stoker quite a lot.
Fair enough, that makes sense.
But he was really influenced by Bram Stoker.
I think here...
Not just in his racism.
Yeah. Scandal note of Lovecraft. I think here... Like, I assume in the film, Dracula probably spoke a bit more because obviously he interacted with John Harker when he went to Transylvania.
And also they had Bela Lugosi, so...
Yeah, with Renfield in Transylvania. But here I think is, one of the things that makes this adaptation a worthy adaptation.
Yeah.
They've made this stylistic choice, which works for the comic, and it kind of gives it that epistolary feel a bit as well. Because we are seeing the characters go about the story, but they're all talking about Count Dracula. And the only times we see Dracula is when he's interacting with one of these characters.
Yeah,
we never see Dracula doing anything by himself, and we never hear him talk except right for the very end. And I think that all contributes to, again, this idea of he's not a character, he's the evil that is infecting the town, the place they're in and the people. And
and I agree with you, and it lends it power, doesn't it? I was thinking about something similar with reference to Rick and Morty recently. You know Evil Morty?
Yeah.
So he's this sort of force, and we don't really know much about him, and it's all very...
I mean, we do now.
Yeah, and this is the point, isn't it? You know that ba-da-ba-ba as he walks away, and it's really impactful. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, right. Really fucking cool.
Mm.
And then he just sort of starts turning up in a season, and it's like, oh, he's just another Morty now.
Yeah, and I don't mind that as a thing. Like, I don't think you can keep the mystery for too long because then it just becomes
but doesn't it
annoying.
lose its power? And like when Rick finally gets to beat up and kill the other Rick, and even Morty looks at him and go, well, was that satisfying? And you go, well, I know it wasn't. And also it wasn't for us as viewers, right? Because it was the end of the intrigue, and what was interesting was the intrigue.
Yeah.
What we don't have here is a breaking down of the intrigue. The intrigue remains through the whole comic book, and isn't that fucking fantastic? Isn't it so satiating?
And that's why again I think this is such a good adaptation, especially for me who's not had any of the other original Dracula stuff at all.
Yeah.
When we get to the ending, I think the pivot into the Renfield forgiveness. So I've got actually a pro and a con for the kind of ending, and I'll start with the pro. I really like how it just shifts focus to the idea of forgiving Renfield. Like, it's such you don't expect that in this kind of horror story. I don't know if that's the same in the book, but it gets to this point where Renfield's just, it's such a nice part of what you don't expect this kind of niceness in this story. But Renfield feels empathetic for Mina because Mina's nice to him. Yeah. She's literally trying to interrogate him for information about Count Dracula, but she's just being nice about it.
Yeah.
And he has obviously never had anyone nice to him, which is why the appeal of power from this mysterious figure is so alluring.
Yeah, totally.
He's been rejected by society, and now he's got the chance to become the king of the world or whatever he might be. And the fact that Mina just changes it all would just treating him a bit like a human being. He doesn't even really do anything after that. It's that he accidentally leads the others to Count Dracula place. He's at some castle, some local place, and he's just like, oh, I didn't lead them here intentionally, whatever. And Dracula's like, yeah, fuck you, mate, and just goes to kill him, basically, or drops him, and so he's dying. And he's not changed it. He's not done like the stereotypical reformed character. He's like, actually, I'm going to save. I was on the bad guys team, but now I'm going to save the day. But he's just remorseful, and that's enough for Seward to look. Van Helsing's like, we're going to chase the Dracula because we know what we're doing. You stay here. And he's just listening to Renfield just confess and how remorseful he felt. And Renfield's just like, I'm dying. Like, that's it. I just want to die. And he's like, and I know I'm damned as well. I just want to be a damned human and not a damned beast. Like,
and that's what he gets in the end, isn't it?
Well, we assume. Like, we don't know how the afterlife stuff works here, but it's the sentiment. It's all it needs is just that sentiment. And see, we're just like, and forgiving him.
Yeah, it was a cool ending, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I really liked that part. It took me by surprise. And then when I got the ending that I expected, this is where I had the complaint. Because what happens apparently is, and they explain a bit more in the film, what happens here is they chase Dracula, who's running away from them, and then they find him sleeping in a coffin, and they stake him. And that panel, him being staked, fantastic. Like, all the red comes out and it looks like a powerful scene, and Van Helsing's like, yeah, what he's doing.
So as I recall in the book, and again, it's been like 16 or 17 years since I read it, and I didn't get all the way to the end of it, obviously.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they just sort of like corner him in a graveyard and just shank him a bunch of times with stakes. Like, that's the end of the book. He just gets shanked a bunch of times with stakes.
But the thing is, that would still lose a bit of it by being an epistolary.
Yeah.
Like, it would not have that powerful end scene because you're not viewing it in that way.
Yeah.
In the film, apparently, what happens is they find Dracula, but as they're finding him, the sun is coming up. And this is a kind of vampire that he needs to be locked away in any sunlight or he's fucked. And so in the film, he gets in the coffin because he's literally got no other choice. And then they find the coffin and stake him. In this, they miss out the fact that the sun is rising.
Yeah.
So it looks like, and I went back and checked this and then looked up the film to confirm this, because I suspected. But from it looks in the comic story, he's like, shit, they found me. I'll get in bed and hide.
This is it.
And then he gets killed. And it's like, that really dampers the whole mysterious, evil kind of thing where he's just like, oh, we found his bed. Like, we could just kill him now. Like, it's easy now.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I really like the Renfield forgiveness story. Very new,
that should
very
have
different.
been the end.
Well, not even though it should be the end. It kind of dampened the Dracula ending. Because by comparison, I was like, oh, I really like this part. And this like it's really like it's a really great story. Like it's interesting. It's completely out of left field.
It was
to
quite
me
powerful
and,
stuff, wasn't it?
My modern sensibilities with storytelling and stuff. And then on the other side, you've got, we killed him. Found his bed, killed him. Like, it's done. Like, so those two happening at the same time just felt really weird. But other than that, like, that's probably my biggest complaint.
I was going to say, overall, what did you think of it?
Overall, I really enjoyed it. Like,
yeah, me too.
And I tell you what, some unintentionally hilarious parts, right? Two major ones. One is Van Helsing as he's talking to Seward, and this is after the Mina, like, she's obviously taken over thing. Great reveal with her creepy face.
Yeah.
Again, great face. We should have mentioned this in art. Great facial
great
art.
face. Yeah, great facial expression.
She's just staring into your soul, dead-eyed, creepy and whatever.
It's really well done, isn't it?
And also the reveal of Lucy, the dead body. She has the dead-eye look, which they isolate in a separate panel. And then in another isolated panel, the bloody smile.
Yeah.
So those two, when they're on together, look really creepy. And then it separates them. She's like, she's dead, but she enjoyed it. And that's makes it way worse.
That was super impactful for me. I actually went back to that panel a couple times.
Exactly. The funny part is Van Helsing talking to Seward after the Mina reveal. And he just says, shall we drink to your daughter? She was a fine woman. And Seward's like, mate, she's still alive. And Van's just like, nah, she's dead, mate. Like, do you want to bury her now? Or like, just so... It was obviously not meant to be funny, though, because obviously
super blunt.
Yeah. And the other one, again, the panel layout made this, I think, intentionally funny. Seward going on about his blood transfusion experiments, and he's like, I've been doing all this, and like people have having a go at me, but I'm pushing modern medicine or whatever. Like I was trying to do this thing, like, and experimenting or whatever. And the guy he's talking to, who's like the head of the hospital or whatever, just goes, basically just like, and did the girl live?
Yeah.
And Seward just isolated that one pound. So I was going, no. It's like a disappointed parent being like, did you clean your room? Like,
no.
No.
No, if anything, I did a poo in it.
If anything, it's worse. Actually. So unintentionally funny moments, which again, just add to the whole thing. Like I was creeped out at parts. I was in the story at parts, and I had some laughs. So all aspects of storytelling were being
and this was from this year, wasn't it?
Yep. This started late last year, continued early this year, so it counts in our wrap-up of the year.
Fucking hell. I liked it.
Yeah, I thought it was fun. And what's especially interesting as well is, and you know what, because we got into the comics so early on, you know what we left out?
What's that?
That this is part 3 of Spooky Season.
Oh, yeah, we did. Sorry, that's my fault.
I was going to include a blur.
Nice,
Dracula,
nice.
But yeah, what we will be doing for next couple is there are some other Universal Monsters Image comics.
Cool, yeah.
So we'll surprise you with which ones they are. But
we're going to do Frankenstein, aren't we?
There's a Frankenstein and there's a Creature of the Black Lagoon.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we'll do one of those next week and the other one the other week.
I really like So I don't dislike Bram Stoker's Dracula. I know I bring it up a lot.
Yeah.
But it's because it uses a narrative.
It's on your bingo card.
Pardon?
It's on your bingo card.
Yeah, it's because
Jamie mentions Bram Stoker's Dracula.
It's because it uses a very particular narrative format. And it's just the easiest way to describe that format. But I do quite like Frankenstein.
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Yeah. See, I know things.
Because I read a lot. I was really into Lord Byron, like really into Lord Byron.
I mean, who isn't?
I know, right? when I was at uni, I wrote my dissertation on Lord Byron.
Oh, fancy Dan!
Oh, I know,
dissertation.
Right? Oh, yeah, it's just a big essay.
Did you have to defend it to a panel or something?
No, I got a bachelor's, mate.
Okay.
I got a BA. I've not got a fucking PhD.
I don't know. I don't know how this works.
No, you don't have to defend it. It just gets marked.
Fair.
I would love to write a thesis and have to defend it. That would be great fun. This bit where you said it's quote unquote fucking sick.
Yes, what I meant by that was it was totally rad.
Totally gnarly, dude.
Also, funny part I missed off, but I just thought was great is
no, you can't. We can't go back. We can't go. We've chilled out now. We've simmered down.
Renfo's like, Dracula, like, please help me out. And Dracula's like, here's 1,000 rats.
Yes.
And
stupid.
Like, thanks. And I interpreted that as it's the employee who's asking for a wage increase, and they give them a pizza party.
Pizza party.
But it's rats.
It's so true, isn't it?
So, would you like to hear about the Dark Universe?
I mean, we have 15 minutes to fill. So yeah, I have to.
So the Dark Universe is interesting because, again, the reason these comics are being made is because Universal owns the rights to their original Universal films.
Yeah.
So like the 30s and 40s, those kind of ones. Yeah. That's the ones they're kind of banking on, being like, we can make these for films and whatnot.
Yeah.
So they tried, I think like 2015, 2014, to get a cinematic universe, i.e. in the vein of the Avengers, but their own cinematic universe of monsters. And they were trying to make the monsters into like the characters that would be the main focus of these films.
So Dracula
eventually, yeah.
Frankenstein's monster, I assume.
In a way. So they were actually going to do a Bride of Frankenstein at one point. So I'm actually going to...
So I've seen that film.
They'd never released it. That's the... You mean the original one, do you mean?
Well, there's a film where Frankenstein is doing it because his wife's died, and then he reanimates his wife and he like creepily dances with her, and then his monster steals her.
So the original film, you mean?
Is that what happens?
I'm asking you. You've said you've seen this.
Oh, well, this is the thing. I've seen a Frankenstein film.
Right. Was it old?
Older, yeah.
Okay.
Not super old,
So
though.
this one, so they were slating a bunch of films to make, right?
Yeah.
And I've sent you a picture over our secret chat, but this picture is when they were like, this film...
secret chat?
Yeah.
Not just the chat that we use for everything.
Yeah, the secret one. But so they were gearing up to start this universe, and they had this picture of all the actors who are going to be like the main players in this universe, right? So they released this picture, and this was right before what was going to be the first of these films, The Mummy 2017 with Tom Cruise, right?
Okay.
So they actually started off with one called Dracula Untold. So he was going to be the first one, right? Traditional Dracula story. He's kind of either in the Impaler.
Vlad the Impaler.
Yeah, Vlad the Impaler makes a deal with the devil, becomes very powerful, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of that, the reveal is that he's now in modern day. But there was also, as a post-credit scene, they also had Charles Dance, who was a vampire from way back when, in the modern time as well.
I mean, I fucking love Charles Dance.
Well, he hammed up a little bit here, because in the post-credit scene, he basically looks not at the camera, but nearest to the camera, and goes, well, the game's afoot, and then ends. So it's like, more to come. And then they were like, we're doing a monster cinematic universe. And then they did all that, and then they were like, but that one doesn't count. That one's not part of it. Like the film they just did to get it started, the Dracula film. They were like,
so why was
ignore
that part of it?
They were just like, bollocks, don't worry about that. We're starting fresh. Like, and this is emblematic of the whole problem. It was a mess, this getting off. Like, there was no singular vision. There was just it was studios trying to make this bollocks.
Just to explain what Ryan has sent me, he sent me a photograph of Russell Crowe.
Yep.
Tom Cruise.
Yep.
Johnny Depp.
Yep.
And two people I do not recognize.
Man's Javier Bardem, and I unfortunately don't remember the woman's name. She played the Mummy in the 2017 film The Mummy with Tom Cruise.
Right. So essentially,
Big
they
lineup.
botched it.
Yeah, and what they were going to do as well. So the other thing about that picture, which is so funny, they released this picture. It's like, we're doing a Monster Dark universe, whatever.
Yeah.
Here's the picture. Here's all the people that's going to be in it. It's going to be a big thing. None of those people are in the picture together. They post separately and they Photoshop the picture later. They couldn't even get their stars. And you could Google this, search Dark Universe cast photo.
They couldn't even get them in the same room.
They couldn't even get them in the same room, organized to like promote this brand new universe that was starting. They had to get all the photos separately and then Photoshop them together. So then they made The Mummy, which was this is the real star now. Forget that Dracula film. This is the real star. And the way you knew it was the real star was Tom Cruise plays like a explorer type guy who the mummy is the woman, and then he gets the mummy powers or something. Basically, it was bollocks. It bombed horribly. But what was especially funny is Russell Crowe was in it, and he played Dr. Jekyll, who in film, and he is like the Nick Fury of the Avengers type character, because he's part of this secret organization that's, monitoring the dark things that go bump, kind of like the BPRD in Hellboy, but like their version. And they have this scene where it's all the Easter eggs of the other ones. So like, here's what we're going to do in the future. Like, there's a Creature of the Black Lagoon reference in the background there. Like, maybe that will be one of the films coming up. Like, that kind of stuff. So they were really trying hard for remember the old phrase, everyone wants an Avengers film, no one wants to make Iron Man.
Yeah.
This was them making like Iron Man 2, if that makes sense. Like some characters already in, they're not jumping straight away to the team up. But they were still jumping the gun quite a bit here. So anyway, that film bombed. Yeah. And that was the point when they went, actually, let's just not bother. It became one of those things where they didn't just automatically announce it. The news constantly was just, hey, what's happening with the Dark Universe? And just no one was answering. Yeah. It was one of those things. Like, that last film did really badly. You guys still doing the Dark Universe? And they were like, yeah. We're gonna get on that. Yeah, don't worry about it.
Passed me by, Ryan.
Oh yeah, it's one of those like film nerd kind of things that I know about. There is this kind of franchise talk. What I thought was interesting as well is Johnny Depp was meant to be the Invisible Man, and
Invisible Man.
Yeah,
and who's that?
The Invisible Man.
I don't know the Invisible Man.
He's a relatively famous. He's one of those Universal monsters. It's like a science experiment gone wrong, and man goes invisible, and then it's based on a book. Like all those ones are like based on great novels and stuff. But he was meant to be the Invisible Man. Javier Bardem, I think, was meant to be Frankenstein, but that film was going to be Bride of Frankenstein, and the bride was meant to be Angelina Jolie. So they were really lining up big really main players for this. But again, then the Mummy film flops, and they were like, actually, let's not bother. So that was the brief rise, and then death, and then reanimation, and then limbo, not quite alive, not quite dead, life of the Dark Universe, which is kind of appropriate when you think about what the monsters it was about.
If we're being entirely honest, it was a shitty idea from the outset.
Oh yeah, 100%. Again, they wanted an Avengers, and they had the rights to these characters. That's literally the two things that spawned this idea.
Yeah, and you are right, and we've said this so many times on the podcast, and I don't think we even came up with the expression.
No, I heard it from somewhere else.
I think we're quoting someone else. But yeah, everyone wants to make Avengers, nobody wants to make Iron Man.
It was never more clearer than when they did Batman v Superman.
Yes.
That was like, you're starting a new Batman character, and he's not even got his own film. That's what spurred to that realization.
And the MCU thing, I think, happened at this magical moment where we were ready for nerd culture and people were ready for superhero stuff, and the CG had just gotten good enough to make it work in a meaningful way. And they had a bunch of actors who ended up being really passionate about these roles who weren't a big deal at the time.
Yeah.
Like Robert Downey Jr. wasn't the huge deal that he is now.
I mean, he was well known, but he was considered a liability, as opposed to the other two were unknown.
He was almost fresh out of rehab, wasn't he?
Exactly.
He was almost fresh out of fucking prison.
Yeah. And there's a whole thing with actors need to be insured for projects.
Yeah.
And when you've got a guy like him, or studios, basically Jon Favreau had to really fight to get him cast. Really had to convince Marvel, this is the guy, this is who you need. But yeah, what's interesting, as you say, is you had these characters with the MCU that people were really, really invested in beforehand. Not a lot of people, globally, but there were cult is the wrong word to use, but there were pockets of fandom, comic book fans who were really passionate about these characters who hadn't been adapted yet.
It's interesting because the MCU has sort of made Robert Downey Jr. an elder statesman.
Oh yeah,
to a certain degree. He's sort of become an elder statesman and a fashion icon and just an icon in general. He's become this really highly regarded, really respected, well-liked dude. Everybody sort of, all of those guys coming up through the MCU films look up to RDJ.
Oh yeah, and he helped them
just hearing the way that
hearing
the way that Tom Holland talks about him.
I mean, he was literally like the Uncle Ben to Tom Holland's Spider-Man, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
But billionaire Uncle Ben.
But I think that's the role that those films filled culturally to a certain degree.
What I was saying before about characters that people being invested in these characters, that I think Universal wanted that, but they were never going to get that. There's no diehard Dracula fans. There's vampire. People like vampire stuff, and if you tell them a Dracula film's coming out, they'll probably go see it. But they're not going to be like, who's going to be cast as Dracula next? Not to the same degree as who's playing Batman in the new DC universe,
or the conversation and speculation right now about what RDJ's role is going to be in the MCU.
Yeah, I think certain YouTuber's going to be releasing a video very soon about that very same topic.
Well, hopefully he promotes our podcast when he does it.
There's a quick mention at the end, like, the podcast.
But yeah, no, it's like, those films. I remember, there was sort of 5 or 10 years there where you asked people what films they watched. They were like, oh, I like Marvel films.
And that's encompassing of all superhero films now.
Yeah,
like
but it kind of
WWE
became its own genre.
Wrestling. Yeah.
It became its own genre. And like it became the dominant cultural force for a long time. And yeah, you're just never going to be able to replicate that magic again.
Well, that's, again, Universal. Both Warner Brothers at least had the DC comics. Like it's really stupid that they didn't do it right, because they could have. They had all the right parts. They could have done it.
And before the MCU, DC Comics were they felt more culturally relevant and more popular to me.
I mean, they got Batman and Superman. Like that's all you need, really. You get
and Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman, unfortunately, like it's not fair, but Wonder Woman they're called the Trinity. She's far less in like just general sales.
She's a sick character, though.
Yeah, no, but that's what I mean. You have Batman and Superman. You use their popularity to introduce all the other characters.
Yeah.
Like, even the Avengers, having the Hulk, like, he was probably the most well-known character of the main 4 Avengers. Obviously, Iron Man became very famous from just that one film.
But he was a super unloved Marvel comic hero, wasn't he?
But the fact that people are like, I know the Hulk. Like, just know, like, Hulk is that kind of known on just that rung under Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man. Like, people know of the Hulk. Even before the Avengers were as well known as they are now, people knew the concept of the Hulk. Probably because, like, the old Lou Ferrigno
I was about to say
TV show. But, yeah, I just thought it was so funny that Universal were like, we have characters. We could do that. So, no, you couldn't.
No.
But someone could. Like, anything could be good. Like, that's something I've heard from other podcasters. It's a good thing to live by.
And somebody did make a little ensemble out of these types of characters, and they did quite well with it. Their name was Alan Moore.
Yeah. I was going to say, in comic format, yes. In film format, I might be the only person who likes that film.
People liked that film, didn't they, at the time?
Hated that film. Well,
really?
It's not a great film in itself. Like, I liked it because I saw it at a certain age. But also, if you were a fan of the comic book, I completely understand why you'd hate the film. Because I saw the film first and then read the comic after. It's like, oh, this comic's like way better than the film. I still like the film, but like the comic's way better.
Yeah.
So if you were a comic book fan who was like, can't wait for this film adaptation of my favorite comic book by Alan Moore, and then comes and go, what is this? What the hell is that?
And it's all about Van Helsing.
That's not about Van Helsing. The Van Helsing film is about Van Helsing.
Oh, I get the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and Van Helsing mixed up a lot.
That's weird. They came out Van Helsing was quite a few years, I think, after. Yeah. That was the Hugh Jackman assance, like after the first X-Men film.
Yeah.
That Van Helsing film is good. I enjoy that.
Yeah, it kind of slaps.
All right. Shall we end with quick fire round, vampire related franchises, content, whatever. What's the kind of stuff that you've enjoyed? Because vampire is such an overarching like genre.
Do you know what, mate? I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not a vampire guy.
I would not describe myself as a vampire guy. Maybe,
I'm not sexy enough. Twilight.
I don't like Twilight either, but I did watch, growing up, I watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel.
Oh, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer was fucking fantastic.
It is. And unfortunately, it has to be credited to Joss Whedon, scandal noted, but that was a whole new kind of like character dialogue interaction, like that quippy back and forth kind of thing, which works, I think, a lot better in like a kind of campy TV show that also had like fun fight sequences for TV level. Like it wasn't bloody Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, but it was like good for normal television. Like, they're doing like roundhouse kicks to each other, and she's like fighting vampires.
Television in the, what, 90s, 2000s?
Late 90s, I'd say. Yeah.
Late 90s, yeah.
But the thing about that is, like I said, I'm not into Twilight. I don't like it. I think when I was younger and it first came out, I hated it. And now I'm just like, it doesn't matter. But like at the time, I was like, these aren't real vampires. It sparkles. Blah. And now I was like, who cares? Like, it's not for me.
It was cool.
It
was cool to dislike it, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think I was on the bandwagon. But yeah, now I'm just like, who cares? But what I will say in its defense, especially as someone who liked Buffy and Angel, I don't think they're as far from Twilight as fans would like to think.
Yeah, absolutely. I read a vampire book that I quite liked. I think it was called Teeth.
Definitely not a vampire one.
One moment.
Oh no, I'm thinking of a film called Teeth.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's very different.
Very different film.
One moment.
Don't Google it.
No, it was by M.T. Anderson, and it was called Thirsty.
That
was
makes more
good.
sense. Fair enough.
Yeah, M.T. Anderson wrote a vampire book called Thirsty that I quite liked. Because John Green recommended it.
Fair enough.
And I valued John Green quite highly, so I read it at the time and was like, yeah, this is pretty good.
Fair enough. I was gonna say the film From Dusk Till Dawn. Great vampire film.
That's fucking that's banging.
The film of two halves. Like no other film has that hard a genre change in the middle of the film.
Yeah, and it's a weird one as well because
it was written by Tarantino,
but
it
not
was directed by Robert Rodriguez.
Yeah, this is what I was about to say. Is that it's a very, very rare film where we see a Tarantino script through someone else's eyes, right?
Yep. And also, I don't know if this is any kind of record or anything. I know it's been gimmicked in other films that done this kind of thing. But you know, Cheech Marin from Cheech and Chong?
Yeah.
He plays 3 different roles.
Oh, yeah, he does,
and it's like not a thing. It's never just, he's just playing these different characters at different points in the film. But yeah, that's a great one. And I never saw the 2 ones that I know of but didn't see was like Lost Boys and the 1992 Bram Stoker's Dracula film. So like based off the novel directly.
Yeah.
I haven't seen those, but they were kind of mixed together in the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror parody.
So the Lost Boys, somebody I know looks exactly like one of the characters in Lost Boys.
Right.
And he mentioned it, and I still don't know anything about it. Like this will be the first time I actually hear anything about it. What is Lost Boys?
It's just a film about young kid, like family moves to a new town, and the bad kids who the main protagonist kids fall into are vampires.
Right, okay.
And then it turns out there's a head vampire and they have to kill the head vampire to one of the protagonist kids get turned. So they did it all in Simpsons. I know most about it through The Simpsons,
right, okay,
even though I have seen the film years and years ago. But, one of my favorite jokes of The Simpsons was they're going to Mr. Burns's castle in Pennsylvania, I think is the joke.
Right, nice.
But they're on their way. It's like, this is kind of creepy and, you know, like, don't you think anything's wrong? It's like, there's nothing wrong with what's happening. Like, just shut up about it. Now, did everyone clean their necks like Mr. Byrne asked us to? And they're always like, yes. And Homer pulls a rag from his neck. It's like, yeah. And it's black filth on this rag. Like, how dirty was your neck? It's just such a dumb joke. And also the end was like, Bart's a vampire. And Abe Simpson comes in and is like, we must kill the boy. And Marge's like, how do you know he's a vampire? I said, he's a vampire?
Nice.
Nice joke.
I mean, I think, honestly, the piece of vampire fiction that I've enjoyed most is probably Dracula in these 2 forms, the book and this comic book.
That's a high regard for the comic book.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would agree with you, totally. And a good place to end it on, I'd say.
Yeah.
Also, we're like an hour 30 plus, so yeah.
So yeah, it's time to go.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
Tell us about your favorite vampires.
Yeah, in the comments.
And which of them are the most sexy?
Sexy vampires.
Yeah, but like specifically which ones got you going?
Yeah.
Which ones would you let turn you undead? I think I'm doing a better call to action here.
Yeah, I think you are. Though this is the call to action for this episode. Thank you. Goodbye.
Also, leave reviews if you can.
No, it's only funny.
It really helps the show.
It's only funny.
If you
it's only funny if we. It's only funny if we leave it as that call to action. I'm not going to stop.
On YouTube
you
and
can't
TikTok.
stop me.
I've also got.
You can't make this not happen. This is happening, Ryan.
Check them out. That'd be great. And thanks for listening. Thank you. Goodbye.